Hi, it's Devon Laika from Retirement Wellness SA. So you're at that position where you are about to retire or resign if you're a government employee, but you've got a lump sum of money that is available to you. It could be 1/3 of your pension fund or provident fund, or 1/3 of your retirement annuity, but you've got this cash. And now you want to find out, is it a good investment for you to look at property? Should you be taking this cash, investing it into a property, and then having a tenant in there and receiving the income from that on a monthly basis? So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 key elements that's going to help you to make that choice. But not just that choice. I want to teach you a technique that you can use on whichever investment that you are doing. Now, the key thing is you want to use this technique beforehand, meaning before you actually invest the money, because this is how you're going to generate massive amounts of saving. And it's also how you're going to know whether you are in a position to grow your wealth before you commit into some kind of investment. So let's get started. Here's the 5 elements that I want you to pay attention to. The first one that we're going to look at is in terms of term. So if you're looking at a property, what's the term of that particular investment? So how long would you have the investment? Now, I'm sure you'd agree the property itself is most likely it's a long term. Most likely, it's a long-term venture. It's not something that you're gonna sort of like a bank investment that you can put the money in today and take it out after a day or a week or 30 days or 6 months. You see, property itself is a long-term investment, meaning you only likely to sell after a period of time. And when we factor that term, I then want you to have a look at your goal for the money that you have to invest. Are you okay to invest money for that long term? So if you're keeping the property, let's just use an example of 10 years. Are you in a position where you can keep it for that period? Because if you keep it for a short period, then term becomes a risk for you. So in the short time, the growth of that property might not be very high, in which case the return of this investment might not be too good. So you want to pay attention to term. It also brings me to the next thing that I want to chat to you, which is liquidity. And when you're focusing liquidity, I want you to start to analyze how liquid is the investment, meaning how easy it is to get access to money if you need it, if an emergency had to come up. Again, when it comes to a property, it's not an investment that you can just sell overnight. There's a process that is involved when a property is getting sold. It's going to involve attorneys and estate agents, perhaps, and meeting different buyers. And there's a long process. And that process itself hampers your liquidity. So it's not immediate. Yeah, not immediate. So again, before you factor this, before you invest into the property, I want you to analyze the money that you are investing. Is that money something that you don't need immediate access for? Meaning, are you okay that you can leave this money aside for X number of years? If you are okay to do that, then you know this is something that can work for you, property, because you don't have an immediate need. You must be able to have other reserves that you can access if this is something that you want to work well. And then a very, very sensitive point that I want to talk to you about, especially when we're growing wealth, and that is tax. Now, there's no way to avoid the tax, you see, so you're never going to just, well, actually, when I say avoid it, there's no way to evade it because you don't want to hide certain things from SARS, meaning you don't want to not declare your rental income. You don't want to not declare that you've made this investment in the property because that creates a lot of risk for you and that's illegal. But you want to look at what are the steps you can take to keep the taxes to an absolute minimum. So from a tax perspective here, I want you to pay attention to 2 things. One is rental income. Now, what happens with rental income when you receive it is that income is going to be added to your other income. So if you can imagine this being your pool of income, now you're adding rental income to this. Let's illustrate this better. So let's say here is this is the income that you're receiving from any other retirement investment that you have. And this is your rental income. So what I want you to see from from the perspective of SARS is previously, prior to the property, SARS only knew about this income source. And because they just knew about this income source, your tax revolved around that. Now you've got the rental property in play, which means from a tax perspective, SARS is going to add these two amounts and tax you on the higher amount. Now, if you look at our tax table, tax is calculated on a sliding scale, meaning the more income you're earning, the more tax you are going to pay. So you want to be very mindful from a rental income perspective, the tax that you are paying, because that impacts the return that you're getting from the investment if you're paying a huge chunk in tax, especially if your income is high, because you already are on a high tax bracket. And then the next thing I want you to pay attention to also from a tax perspective is capital gains tax. So capital gains tax, or you might know this as CGT, gains tax, mind my writing, yeah. Now, capital gains tax can affect you in two ways. One is when you are alive and you are making a sale. So you are around and you determine, hey, you know what, I've had this property for a certain number of time now and it's time for me to let go. Now you are selling the property. What happens with the gain is, if you bought that property for R1 million, let's use an example here, you bought it for R1 million and the property then sold. So this is bought and then you sold it for 1.5 million. So you sold it for that. What is your gain here? Your gain is 500,000. What SARS is saying is that 500,000 is taxable. So they are going to tax that gain. Now, this happens, yes, when you are alive because you're there and if you want to sell it. But I also want you to pay attention that this can also happen when you pass away. Actually, it is going to happen when you pass away because SARS deems that you've sold this asset, which means automatically this capital gains tax would trigger. So from a tax perspective, you need to make sure you've got this thing covered on both aspects. The next thing that I want you to pay attention to is just from a risk perspective. So write that in here, risk perspective. Now, what are the risks that you could have on the property? A lot of them you probably already know. From a risk perspective, we know there's a risk of having a tenant. It's not as easy to let the tenant leave, vacate the place. So that becomes a risk. The tenant does not pay. It becomes a risk because it affects the return that you're getting from your investment. If the tenant then becomes malicious and starts to damage the property, that becomes an issue. If the tenant moves out, that becomes an issue because then you have to go back into the place. You might have to do some renovations to get it up to a livable standard again before you get the next person to come in to rent the unit out. So a number of factors that you want to pay attention to. And the last critical point is return. So you notice that usually people look at this from a return perspective in the beginning. I've deliberately put this to the end here because now you know the pre-frame of all the aspects that we're working on. What affects the return is all four areas that we've just spoken about. But what I've noticed that a lot of people forget to look at from a return perspective is when they're looking at the property here, it's almost like, hey, I bought this for R1 million and I sold it for 1.5 million. So there's a 500,000 gain. But what you need to factor on your return is what are the costs? Meaning you could have had attorney's costs to purchase this property. You could have had transfer duty that were in here. See, you could have had lots of initial costs that came up in the beginning. See, you could have had costs for furnishing the place. See, depending. So there are a number of costs that could have come up at the beginning. You also want to factor tax. So all of these things add up the cost. Even estate agent fees are part of the cost if you're getting the unit sold. So all of these things will impact your return itself. So you want to pay attention. It's not straightforward that you bought it for a certain price and you're selling it for this. What affects the return is all the other elements that come into play. Now, what I've given you is 5 key frameworks that you can use for any investment now going forward. So you notice here, you haven't actually invested in the property as yet, I hope. And now you want to analyze this. So we're not saying it's a good investment or a bad investment. What I'm sharing with you is analyze this carefully using these 5 points to see which one is most appealing for you. On that note, I want you to see which one of these 5 tips did you find to be the most compelling? Were you familiar with all of them? Is there something that you did not know, which now changes the way that you view property as an investment? And also, have you found this video helpful? If you have, I want you to click the thumbs up sign, and please also subscribe to the channel so that you get to see these videos as soon as we produce them.